guys, Tyler Ansman here with Tyler Ans Performance. So today we're going to talk about overhead hangs. All right, so this is something that's become very popular recently in the last couple of years. And basically it's exactly what it sounds like, right? Hanging from a bar, either for as long as possible, for specific durations of time, one arm, two arms, whatever. All right, and I think this is honestly great for quite a few reasons, right? We can kind of strengthen that overhead position. We're at kind of these end range muscle lengths, which we tend to be weak in. We get some forearm and grip strength, which is super important. And the mental toughness aspect of isometrics is always, great. It's a great way to kind of add some mental toughness to your training. All of these things are wonderful. They can help with shoulder and elbow health. But let's talk about a couple of considerations that need to be made before just kind of adding these to your program. Okay, one is how much upward rotation do you have and what is the starting point of your scapular positioning, okay? So when we're talking about getting fully overhead, right, one of the really important aspects of this is that the scapula can upwardly rotate appropriately. So we're talking about probably roughly to 55 or 60 degrees if we're fully overhead and our shoulder is healthy and starting from a good position, okay? So what does the starting position look like? Well, we're talking about probably about 5 degrees. All right, that the medial inferior border of the scapula, about 5 degrees from the spine, okay? If we're talking about it being kind of swung in more or more depressed than that, we have like kind of an issue with our starting position. So upward rotation may be restricted a little bit. And this is something relatively common to see in throwers as kind of the lat gets a lot of work when they're throwing a lot. So that internal rotator and downward, it's a depressor of the scapula. Right, it kind of pulls that shoulder blade down over the course of the season. So we may have kind of this worse starting position when we come to the end of a long season, or just somebody who hasn't trained properly before, or whatever. So we need to examine the starting position of the scapula. Then we need to talk about what position does the scapula actually get to. Can it get to 55 or 60 degrees? Because if it can, even from a depressed position, then we probably don't have a huge issue there. We may still want to do some things to kind of clean that up, but probably not a big problem there. All right, the other thing is we need to talk about throwing volume. Right, so we're getting a lot of forearm work like we talked about, and the forearm's getting a lot of work when your throwing volume is high, right? So one of the kind of things that we can see relatively frequently in the lead up to a UCL injury is a flexor pronator mass strain, all right? And so when we see that, it can be from a few things, weakness, fatigue, a whole host of other factors. Point being, we don't want to add a ton of fatigue to this already kind of overtaxed muscle group when we're throwing a lot. So you just want to kind of monitor the volume here. Okay. So once we've considered those things, if we do have appropriate upward rotation, if our throwing volume is appropriate or our volume of hangs is appropriate, all of these things, then we're probably okay. But if we're missing that upward rotation, what's likely to happen is we're going to impinge on that subacromial space. All right, so it's already pretty tight in the shoulder. It's pretty claustrophobic in there. So if we don't have appropriate upward rotation of the scapula, what tends to happen is that ball tends to ride up on the socket and cause problems in that subacromial space and give us shoulder pain. All right, and so that's the last thing we want if we're talking about throwing. We get plenty of stress on the sport-specific side. We don't need to add it on the general side as well. All right, so if you check all these boxes and you're good to go, feel free to add some hangs to your training. Otherwise, give these some consideration and make sure you clean up any areas that you have a problem with before adding these to your training.